not come as a surprise.
Unfortunately, I think that that's a commentary that rings all too true. Former Congressman Lee Hamilton, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It is a new day in America, a day of grieving and shock and anger, and a day of profound changes that are yet to come. In what form we cannot say for sure, but obviously this is not just an isolated incident in our lives. This is one that will be a marker in our history. And watching all of this from abroad is Alec Standish, who is with the Jane's Intelligence Digest, as one of the most highly regarded publications in the world in keeping track of just this kind of an incident. Mr. Standish, where were you and what did you think when you first heard that such a carefully coordinated and, I dare say, cold-blooded, efficient attack had been conducted against the United States?
Well, obviously, like all right-minded people, I was totally horrified. But I'm afraid I have to say not entirely surprised. As recently as Friday of last week, our publication specifically warned that anger in the Middle East directed towards the United States from the Islamic world was reaching crisis proportions.
Condemning any country that houses or supports terrorism.
All right, former United States Senator Sam Nunn, Democrat of Georgia.
This hospital, he has been on scene along with other chaplains and spiritual leaders, as well as city leaders. We talked to the city controller, Alan Hevesy, earlier, who was talking about how there was hundreds of firefighters and policemen who started running towards one of the towers right after one of the disasters, and then they were not heard of again. He was down here to donate blood, but we are also hearing about the fate of those firemen and police officers who ran towards one of the towers in a rescue effort. And as you can hear, the dead and wounded keep coming in. There's more NYPD personnel streaming down this closed-off 7th Avenue. We should also tell you that this entire block area has been locked down, so if you have friends, relatives that you want to check in on, you have to call St. Vincent's Hospital. Listen in for the briefing later that they are saying now is at 4 o'clock, or call Cornell Medical Center, NYU, or any of the other burn centers within Manhattan. There are over 50 that are handling the massive amounts of casualties. We'll bring you the latest as we have it. Back to you.
All right, Molly Falconer, thanks very much. Want to bring you the latest bird's eye view of what's going on, at least in Manhattan, from our Dari Alexander, who is on the roof of our building here in Midtown. Dari?
Hello. You know, I just have to stop for a second and tell you, I was downstairs earlier. I was raised in New York. I am a New Yorker. I have to tell you that this is absolutely devastating to New Yorkers to see the two tallest buildings that were tourist sites go down, to be hit by planes, not by accident, and then to see them crumble. It is an absolutely devastating thing. New Yorkers think of themselves as being strong, invincible. To see the city taken under siege like this is just, it is absolutely too much to handle. I was downstairs earlier and I was talking to people who were standing all around Fox Central to get the absolute latest. And everybody is just in shock. Nobody can believe that this is actually happening. Let's just take a look once again straight south at these two buildings. The smoke, just billowing, smoke throughout the sky. The Twin Towers were a great place to get a view of New York City skyline, to get a view of the harbor, the Statue of Liberty. Something else that was in that building, I know we talked about banking and security and all different businesses in that building. A famous restaurant, Windows on the World. I took a wine class there back in the early 90s. A fabulous, beautiful restaurant where people used to go to eat so they could see New York City. This was definitely a mainstay. People will not, it will take forever to get over it. I know a lot of people have been talking about the fact that some people knew some people who were in the building, others didn't know people in the building, but once again, this is something that everybody in New York feels, whether or not you knew them. The other thing that is just incredible is to think that there are warplanes flying all over the sky throughout New York City. And I mean, this is not an air show. This is serious. The city is under siege, and we are seeing warplanes fly across the skies every few minutes.
All right, Dari Alexander, there on the roof of our building. Thanks very much. Yes, the entire air system in our nation has been shut down. No airplanes anywhere being allowed to take off. Those that were in the air today when this horrific terrorist attack went down were ordered to land immediately.
All right, we want to get more information as to who senior officials may think will be found responsible for this horrible act of terrorism. We want to go now on the phone to Lawrence Korb. He was the Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan. He is currently at the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Korb, thanks for being with us.
Nice to be with you.
We understand that at least 3 Palestinian groups, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they have all denied any responsibility for these terrorist acts. Some, actually a number of terrorist experts have believed it is the work of Osama bin Laden. What do you think?
Well, he certainly has said he was going to do something, and so that would be logical to expect him to do it. We don't have any proof yet, but I imagine given the fact that people had to get on these planes and, buy tickets and stuff, we'll be able to establish that pretty clearly within a short amount of time.
I want to explain something to our viewers as they see this on the screen. Yasser Arafat, who is the Palestinian leader, has come out also condemning the attack and saying that he personally and his organization is shocked and horrified. So let us not misunderstand the pictures that we see on the screen. These are some Palestinians in parts of Israel celebrating the attack. We should make it clear that this is separate from the official response of Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Mr. Korb, a question about what we do in terms of a military response. People have already begun talking about when we are likely to respond, how we are likely to respond. From your term as the Assistant Secretary of Defense, explain to us how something like this works in terms of a response at the Pentagon.
Well, you have to find out who did it and how you can get to them, but it's much easier said than done. We still haven't held anybody responsible for the blowing up of the USS Cole, the ship in Aden. We haven't punished those who blew up the Khobar Tower. That's the problem. It's not an individual nation. These are groups that cut across nations, and it's very, very hard to decide where to retaliate. They also hide themselves among civilians. This is not a large army. This is comparatively small groups of people, and that's going to be the frustrating thing. We're going to want to do something, and it's going to be very hard to do it. When I was in government, we never were able to successfully retaliate for those who blew up the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983. We never really did get those who did it.
Right. I want to ask you about something that we saw today. Fairly quickly after we saw these attacks, we saw the leaders of the Taliban government of Afghanistan rushing essentially out to cameras to condemn the attack. Even one of them said that he believed it was impossible for Osama bin Laden to have any sort of involvement with it. If one were being skeptical, one might think that they were simply trying to save their own necks because the United States government would be looking directly at Afghanistan for harboring bin Laden for so long.
Well, there's no doubt about that. The problem you're going to face is that it's going to be hard to establish a definite link between these people and bin Laden. I mean, bin Laden doesn't hold group meetings, in his basement once a week. I mean, these are people that are connected to him with several cutouts all over the world. And as we saw in the recent trial here in New York City for those who blew up the American embassies in Africa back in '98, some of them said they were connected, others did not, and we couldn't bring him to trial. But there's no doubt that the Taliban government in Afghanistan doesn't want to be held responsible because if this were directed by them or they had any complicity, we would have every right to go and basically inflict terrible damage on them.
And just to reiterate, the pictures that you're seeing on your screen today were taken in Palestinian neighborhoods. Palestinians there celebrating this strike at America. As Linda said earlier, Yasser Arafat, the Palestine Liberation Authority leader, condemned the attacks, but that is not preventing this outpouring of great joy, if you want to call it that, among Palestinian people who doubtless see this as a strike against the hated enemy, America. So these pictures taken earlier today in Palestinian areas.
We take it back to Larry Korb, who's graciously joining us on the phone and helping us understand exactly how the U.S. military would formulate a response. Larry, even though Osama bin Laden wasn't necessarily considered a force during the Reagan administration, certainly you had procedures in place for how to coordinate a response to a terrorist attack. What were they?
Well, obviously, but there are things that you can do, but you have to know who to respond against,
Right.
and that's the problem.
But I mean, in terms of sort of, you know, do you have the National Military Command Center in the basement of the Pentagon? Are they
Well, yeah,
leading?
obviously. I mean, what you do then is you have the forces in the area. Most probably you would have ships with cruise missiles or planes with cruise missiles that would attack. Remember, we did attack bin Laden after the blowing up of the embassies in Africa in 1998. We did attack his camp.
Right.
So, yes, I mean, we have forces all around the world. We have bombers that can fly from the United States then attack any place in the world. So that's probably what we would do if we found the people. But that's the problem you have in this new era, that these groups don't belong to any one nation, and there's no real central headquarters that you can hit.
Also, you generally, as I understand it, you, meaning the Pentagon, I mean leaders of at the Pentagon, have a list of response targets already prepared before an attack ever occurs against the United States. There's already a list that you deploy when given the go-ahead by the White House, correct?
Well, that's right. I mean, you have a number. I mean, we have very good intelligence. Our technical intelligence is terrific. We know where these people are, and if we can make a link, yes, then we can go ahead and go after them. The problem is making that link, because the United States stands for decency in the world, and, you know, innocent until you're proven guilty. So it's hard for us to do some of the things that I think the relatives of these poor folks in New York today are going to want us to do because of the procedures that we follow.
Right. Now, I want to take you back again to a statement of a Taliban official, obviously the Taliban government being that in charge of Afghanistan. He said, quote, bin Laden does not have the facilities to orchestrate such a major assault within the United States. Some other terrorism experts are saying that he may be the only person who has the kind of organization to orchestrate this kind of attack. Where do you stand?
Yeah, I think he's the only one. And remember, we're not talking, I mean, he didn't buy missiles or anything like that. What they basically did was hijack 4 airplanes.
Right.
And he certainly has the wherewithal to do that.
Now, the ultimate go-ahead for any sort of strike, when it comes, if it is determined fairly clearly that we have figured out who is responsible for this, how does the chain of command work? I mean, who gives the go-ahead, and where does it have to sort of, does it originate from the top, from the commander-in-chief, the president?
Right. Only the president can order military action, and then he sends the order to the Secretary of Defense, who transmits it to the field commander. But only the president has that authority under our Constitution.
Now, when you say he transmits it to the field commander, does he speak to Donald Rumsfeld?
Yeah, the president.
And then it goes to the Joint Chiefs, or how exactly does it go down the...
Normally what the president would do is he would sign the order or direct the Secretary of Defense to execute whatever the contingency plan would be. The Secretary of Defense would sign the order, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would transmit it through military channels to the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific, to the Commander-in-Chief of our Atlantic forces, or whoever is the area commander. The Commander-in-Chief of the Central Command, for example, would have responsibility for that area. That was General Schwarzkopf's job during the Gulf War. He was the commander of the Central Command.
Mr. Corbett's John Scott with just a general question. I mean, what are our options? We lobbed some cruise missiles at Osama bin Laden years ago. That didn't seem to have much of an effect. What kinds of operations, just in broad strokes, can we consider here?
Well, I think you have to stop these before these people get into the country, get onto your planes, or get these weapons, and it has to be done by the international community. As powerful as we are, the United States cannot do this by itself, because without working with the rest of the world, we can't get these people. And that's the frustrating thing. You saw what happened when we sent the FBI to Aden to investigate what happened with the coal. We didn't get the cooperation. Unfortunately, the world has to deal with this, and the United States needs to take the lead in getting the world to establish guidelines about dealing with these terrorists. Because if they can do it here, they can do it any place.
Let's say we can trace the perpetrators of this to some country somewhere in the world. Would you suggest to the president, if you were still advising him, would you suggest some kind of an armed invasion to go in and get whoever's responsible?
Yeah, I would suggest going in and getting them and working through the local authorities if you could. I mean, because a lot of our friends around the world will be more than happy to help us. And so if the person is in country X, you work with the law enforcement and armed forces there to get them out and bring them to justice.
Larry Korb, we thank you very much, of the Council on Foreign Relations, former Assistant Secretary of Defense under the Reagan administration.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you once again. We take it now to correspondent Rick Leventhal. Perhaps the heroes of this day will be those who have been performing rescue on those who are trapped inside. Rick Leventhal is with one of those individuals right now. Rick?
Countless rescues performed by Bill Quick here with the New York City Fire Department. I know you were on vacation and this happens. Take us through what your first call, and what you did after that.
I drove in. I live in Long Beach. I drove in my car. I could see the smoke coming from the World Trade Center. I have a radio in my car. I can hear everything that's going on. Just mayhem. First plane hit. Second plane hit. The first time I got there, I ran up to the building and a police officer said, "I got people trapped down in the subway." So I went into the subway, went downstairs, got people up. People are bleeding, screaming, crying. And I just said, just come upstairs, go to your left, just keep going to your left. Just find the ambulance, go to your left, go to your left. Within 2 to 3 minutes after that, the first collapse happened of the building. I don't know which building it was. It came down. I was outside. I ran behind a pillar. I got down on the floor. I covered in my coat. I didn't have a mask at the time. I covered my coat, and I was trying to survive. And it was total pitch black for like 10 to 15 minutes. There was an EMT next to me. He goes, "I think I'm burnt." So I looked at him. I said, "No, you're not burnt. You're just covered with soot, hot soot and everything like that." After that, he went on his way. I went and got a mask. I went back in the building, and I went searching for more people, and we found out that there was nobody else left down the subway.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens, and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his cabinet and national security team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
So Karen Hughes apparently taking no questions. Karen Hughes, the senior advisor to the president, giving us an update on the status of some of the most senior people in Washington. The president is most recently landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. She said the president is at a secure location, but she did not necessarily suggest that he is on the base itself. One believes he probably still is. The vice president and the national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in the White House in a secure location, probably that basement bunker there.
It is not very often that this nation is brought to a standstill, but on today, it has happened. Many people here in New York City, in Washington, D.C., all over the country, staring at their televisions, unable to believe what they are seeing happening before them. You see it here on the corner of 48th Street and 6th Avenue in New York City, outside the Fox News Channel headquarters. We have seen this sight in many locations. People just simply in shock at what they're seeing. Who could have thought that an attack of this magnitude would happen in the United States of America? We have had officials planning for such an attack for some time, but many ordinary citizens thought that something like this could never actually happen. So much security in place, so many times that defense officials and others have war-gamed this out and planned for an attack. But on this day, it has happened. No one able to figure out why, particularly September 11th, the year 2001. One person has mentioned that it was supposed to be tomorrow that an associate of Osama bin Laden was due to be sentenced in New York. And others have mentioned that they believe Osama bin Laden is perhaps the only terrorist with the kind of organization who could plan something this massive and this deadly. The United States government not confirming anything of the kind. The Afghan government, which has been accused of, for some years, of harboring Osama bin Laden, rushing to say that they have no knowledge of this and they condemn it. However, they have for years not given Osama bin Laden up to the United States, despite repeated requests from Washington. They are also saying that they do not believe Osama bin Laden is capable of this. There may be many in Washington who believe otherwise at this hour. We're waiting for more briefings to come in. Some planning at the Department of Defense. As you know, Secretary Rumsfeld is still there at this hour. others with officials in New York City. We are going to bring those to you just as soon as they happen. They're going to be happening just sort of suddenly, and as they do, we're going to bring them to you here on the Fox News Channel.
There are a great number of survivors you can see being carted away. This from the lower Manhattan area, where our Rick Leventhal has been doing a great job of reporting all day. Rick is back with us now live and safe, we're happy to say. Rick, what's the latest there?
Well, John, one of the things that you did not hear from firefighter Bill Quick, who I was just speaking with a short time ago, is I asked him, after Karen Hughes' news conference began and we had to break away, I asked him about the number of rescue workers on the ground when that building collapsed, when the first tower collapsed. And he said, in fact, there were hundreds of rescue workers at the base of the building tending to people who had been injured by falling debris from when the planes hit, tending to people who had been hurt by rubble and were bleeding and dazed and wounded and disoriented, trying to help those people when that tower collapsed. And there is a growing concern that hundreds, possibly hundreds, of emergency rescue workers, police officers, firefighters, maybe some very high-ranking members of this city's fire department were killed in the debris that fell from the first of the two towers. After that first tower collapsed, people did clear out of the area very quickly. Some people did go back before that second tower collapsed, so it's possible people were killed in that one as well. But certainly, if there was a high death toll in terms of when the towers came down, it would have been after the first tower. We'll give you a look south on Church Street, where the efforts continue to try and put out the fires that still burn in what's left of the Twin Towers. We're told that one of the two buildings, there may be as many as 10 to 20 stories left standing. The other one, though, is a crater. It's virtually a hole in the ground. You might even be able to see, Adam, can you see the piece of the building? There's a piece of the building in the middle of Church Street. You can't see it right now because of the smoke and the haze, but we're going to, apparently, Rudy Giuliani is now speaking to the mayor of New York. Let's head back to the studio and to the mayor's press conference. Do we have the mayor?
We're attempting, Rick, to get the audio connections from the mayor.
And they handled themselves with bravery. They handled themselves with dignity. They handled themselves in a way that reduced the loss of life. We didn't have panic. We didn't have people running and hurting other people. The people of New York City really distinguished themselves. And I just want to say this once again. New York City is a lot stronger than this, and we're going to overcome it, and the people of New York City are going to give an example of how you stand up to terrorism. You just don't be afraid, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York, there making another statement about the response of this city. Linda, I'd just like to say I've been in this chair now for about, well, it was just about exactly 7 hours ago that the first of these events started unfolding. What a calamitous day for America. And yet, you know that somewhere in the world, somebody is watching these pictures with great glee, watching the pictures of the hijacked airliner, the second one of the day, smashing into and ultimately demolishing the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, the symbol of capitalism to many people around the world. They want us to be scared. They want us to be afraid. As we heard President Bush's senior advisor say not long ago that our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today. They want us to somehow lose some of that freedom, and let's just hope and pray that that doesn't happen.
The United States most definitely will not allow it to happen. However, there will be a coordinated response, you can be sure. We are beginning to get more information about those who were lost today. The numbers in the end may be in the tens of thousands, but we know for sure the number of people who were lost on the 4 commercial airliners that went down today. They were 2 American Airlines planes, 2 United Airlines planes. In honor of those souls departed, let us remind you of who and how many were on those planes. American Airlines Flight 77 bound from Dulles, Virginia to Los Angeles, 77 passengers and 6 crew. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, 81 passengers and 11 crew. United Airlines from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, Flight 93, 38 passengers and 7 crew.
America under attack. Thousands possibly killed as terrorists target several United States landmarks. Good afternoon. I'm Jody Applegate. Steve Avison joins us for a special edition of Fox 25 News.
The United States is a target of a massive terrorist attack. The Twin Towers of New York City's World Trade Center lie in ruins this afternoon, and the Pentagon has suffered massive damage after 3 planes crashed into these 3 different buildings.
2 of those flights took off from Logan Airport this morning. We have extensive live team coverage. First, a recap of what has happened on, it's fair to say, this tragic day in American history.
Well, we'll start off by saying that the first flight was out of Boston this morning. It was United Airlines Flight 93. It took off at 7:58 a.m. It was bound for Los Angeles, but it never made it there. The second flight was American Airlines Flight 11. It took off just 1 minute later at 7:59 a.m. That flight was also headed to Los Angeles. Now, those flights were hijacked, we presume, just shortly after takeoff. At 8:45, the first plane crashes into the side of one of the World Trade Center towers. Both 110-story towers are then ordered immediately evacuated.
Then at 9:03 a.m., a second plane crashes into the other World Trade Center tower. This attack is caught on tape and, in fact, seen live by a lot of people across the country. That plane flew in from the north. The second tower was also devastated by that impact.
At 9:40, the FAA shuts down all commercial airline traffic across the country in response to the attacks. This is the first time this has happened in the history of the country.
At 9:45 a.m., a third plane crashes into the side of the Pentagon building. In fact, the State Department, the Capitol building, and the West Wing of the White House are all evacuated. President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida at the time.
Now, and then at 10:05, the first World Trade Center tower collapses. It was the second one that was struck, but the first to collapse. Debris and smoke covers the Manhattan skyline. Hundreds of people trying to rescue others, trying to escape themselves, are now covered by rubble.
Then at 10 a.m., a large plane crashes about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That plane was on its way from New Jersey to San Francisco.
Back in New York at 10:28 a.m., the second World Trade Center tower collapses. The entire nation now watching in shock today. We now go live to Reed Lamberty, who has been following the story from Logan Airport, where 2 of those planes originated this morning. Reed, what can you tell us is happening at Logan now?
Steve, good afternoon. You know, there has been a lot of confusion about where these planes took off, what time the planes took off, and what airlines they are. We just got wrapped up with a press conference not too long ago with the Director of Public Safety for Massport, Joe Lawless. This is what he's telling us. American Airlines Flight 11 took off at 7:59 this morning, heading straight nonstop to Los Angeles. 15 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 departed. All told, there were 157 people on board the 2 flights, both of which crashed into the World Trade Center. Now, everyone here showing and sharing the incredible grief that we have seen across the country, employees and families of victims embracing, trying to find comfort with each other. Now, all planes at Logan Airport grounded until further notice. All passengers asked to leave the airport on its highest security alert it's been in recent years. FBI and state police heading this investigation, questioning those people who worked at the security gates today. Airport officials say there was really nothing unusual about either takeoff this morning, and air traffic controllers are saying they are giving no indication that anything was wrong. In fact, they didn't even know a plane had been hijacked, let alone 2. Right now, family members of the victims are meeting at the airport Hilton, where grief counselors and spiritual leaders are helping them deal with this tragedy.
Our top priorities, first and foremost, are the families, the needs of those families, and the safety and security of everyone who works and travels through this airport. It's a system that we have in place where there are various security responsibilities shared by the airport and by the air carriers under the direction of the FAA. The actual operation of the security checkpoint is an airline responsibility.
And right now, airport security coming under fire. Questions of the security breach. Somewhere the security gates are being raised. And again, Massport shares some of that responsibility, but most of the responsibility does fall on the airlines. Now, as far as the stranded passengers, they were being carted off to hotels. Those who couldn't be in hotels were going to be treated by Massport, given food and shelter temporarily at least. And again, the airport, Logan Airport, is closed indefinitely until it gets further notice from the FAA. Steve and Jody?
All right, Reed. Logan Airport has been subject to criticism in the past for lax security. We'll have a security expert to share more information on that part of the story later in this broadcast.
And in fact, the FAA has shut down all commercial air traffic in the U.S. until at least noon tomorrow. But here close to home, Acting Governor Jane Swift is calling for calm in Massachusetts. She spoke from the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency in Framingham this afternoon. Fox 25's Bob Ward was there, and he joins us now with the very latest. Bob?
Jody, the governor's message this morning was very clear. There is no state of emergency here in Massachusetts. She's urging people not to panic, to remain calm. Now, the governor said that here at the MEMA headquarters of the bunker here, that she is huddled with other top officials from the state. They're watching and waiting for word of anything that they need to do to swing into action. So far, the only thing that has happened on the part of the state is that 2 F-15s out of Otis Air Force Base, Air National Guard planes, were sent into the airspace over New York. As of early this afternoon, those planes were still up in the air. Also, a search and rescue team, out of Beverly was sent out to New York City at the request of Governor Pataki to help to look for any survivors, any bodies that can be found at the scene of this terrorist attack. But again, the governor urging people in Massachusetts not to panic. Here's a little bit of what she had to say.
We are aware of the potential targets for terrorist attacks, and we've taken necessary steps to protect the public safety. And I'm not going to comment on what we might do, because I think it's important that people understand we are doing everything necessary right now to respond to the situation.
That press briefing took place just a couple of hours ago. We expect another press briefing by Governor Swift within the hour. She's also set to tour the facilities here to talk again to more people here, other emergency people here who are monitoring the situation. But right now, Massachusetts is just standing ready. The hospitals are standing ready. The Air National Guard, as I mentioned, 2 F-15s have been sent, and the search and rescue team, but that has been it. If more help is needed and requested by New York or by Washington, of course they will be sent. But the governor is trying to make it clear that that the business of the state continues, even though non-essential workers of the state have been sent home. But she expects, at least she said earlier today, that she thinks that state workers should be able to report to work tomorrow, that there are no obvious targets, no direct threats here in Massachusetts. So they're trying as best they can to not let the terrorists win. Jody and Steve?
It's a psychological battle that's being waged as much as anything else to give people the impression that life goes on no matter what. Bob Ward, thanks very much, Bob.
All right, the city of Boston reacted quickly to attacks this morning. Several buildings evacuated and shut down as a precaution, as Bob Ward has emphasized. Fox 25's Mike Beaudet is going to join us later in this broadcast to talk about Mayor Menino and his response to this tragedy. And right now, we will go to either Mike Beaudet or Debbie Rodman. Who shall we go to? All right, Debbie Rodman is live with us now with a report from her vantage point. Debbie?
Well, Steve, a 62-member task force is scheduled to leave Beverly Airport here at this very hour. Let's go ahead and show you the videotape now. This group consists mostly of career firefighters from across New England, from Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire. This group is trained by FEMA. They're very skilled in searching through rubble. They spent the last hour or so getting ready to head to New York. Now, they're not releasing just how they'll get there, by ground or by air, and that, of course, is for security reasons, but they do say this is a rescue mission, not a recovery mission, but a rescue mission. They're going there to save lives. Now, they have enough supplies for the next 3 days, but they expect to be on this operation up to 2 weeks.
Sorry to see anyone under these circumstances. This is probably the gravest thing we'll ever witness in our lifetimes. And right now, I'd like everybody to collect themselves and have a moment of silence for everybody that's passed on and been injured in this.
Obviously, this is an emotional time for this crew. These families, their families, are very reluctant, of course, to let them go into this disaster area. But of course, these men are trained in this, and they're all volunteers. And when they get that call to go into that disaster area, they step up to the plate and they go. Jody and Steve, to you.
All right, just what we'd expect from folks down here. Thanks, Debbie Rodman up in Beverly.
All right, and of course, the city of Boston reacted very quickly to this, not the least of which because Boston figures so prominently in this story. Several buildings were evacuated downtown, including the Prudential and the Hancock Tower. And Fox 25's Mike Beaudet is live in Boston with more on what's going on in the city today. Mike?
Jody, I can tell you that if you look around the city right now, it is really cleared out for a weekday. Many of the buildings, including the State House behind me, have closed down. And as these terrorist attacks unfolded, there was a real concern something could happen in Boston. Fear of a terrorist attack in Boston leads to this. Buildings are evacuated, including the John Hancock Tower.
Secretary from the front desk comes in and says she couldn't speak, actually, and basically said that 2 planes had flown into the World Trade Center and there was just a rush out of all the offices, everyone down to the conference room.
We were all very scared, and we didn't know, because John Hancock Building is a very important building in Boston, and it could be a very good target. So that's why we were all frightened, and the important thing is because, we didn't know, today we left the building, but what about tomorrow and the after, That's the scariest part.
There are some chaotic moments in Government Center as bomb scares trigger more evacuations. The city takes precautions, sending home non-emergency workers. Boston's mayor and police commissioner try to calm people in the city.
Life in America has changed forever because of this incident that we've had this morning. And our prayers are with the families that were lost in this senseless incident. So I just ask everyone in our city to step back and say a little prayer for these individuals.
I think we're all going to have to work, both private and public security, to make sure that the people that come in and come out of this city do so safely. And the department's committed to doing that. And certainly the last thing we want to do is cause panic.
Some people's fear and concern is turning into action. Look at the line out the door to donate blood at the Red Cross for victims of the terrorist attacks.
Well, I'm a second-year medical student at Tufts, and I just wanted to do something besides watch TV. I wanted to come help out some.
You sort of feel powerless being a student. There's not much I can do from where I am. So between classes, with my backpack ran down, trying to help out, this is all I can do for now.
The MBTA is providing free service and the Turnpike is not collecting tolls. It's all an effort to help get people out of the city. But again, the mayor is urging people to stay calm throughout the situation. Jody?
Well, this is an international story, a national one, and certainly an important local story, which unfortunately will end up touching, mostly in tragic ways, thousands of families in our viewing area.
Also worth pointing out that while there is a lot of people in line for blood right now already, they've reached their threshold in terms of being able to take the blood. They're going to need your blood for weeks to come because the American blood supply is going to be depleted. So save up your energy and your commitment to doing that.
Right. They're kind of overwhelmed today, but they're saying until about Thursday, then it'll be a good time to come back in and donate blood if you so choose. They have what they need right now, and they don't have personnel to take it all in.
This is not the first time that the United States has been struck by terrorism, but it is probably the first time that it has been struck from so many different directions on so many different fronts. This is the second time that the World Trade Center has been struck by terrorists, and Fox 25's Tori Ryden joins us now with a terrorism expert who's been there.
And this has been an extraordinarily enormous hit as well, Steve. Well, joining me right now is the president of American International Security Corporation, Michael Taylor. Michael, you and I have been talking. This did not come as a surprise to you today. Why? Were we warned?
We were warned. Matter of fact, Osama bin Laden had reported through the media that he was going to attack the United States in a most spectacular way. That was some 3 weeks ago, and that was reported in the media. Moreover, these types of scenarios are routinely planned for through the special operations community and U.S. government intelligence sources.
Well planned out. 4 planes we're talking that were part of this whole thing. The enormity, though, you were not taken aback by that?
No, we weren't. It all boils down to basic fundamental security issues that were obviously not in place today, and that ultimately caused the tragedy that we see today.
We've been watching the horrific video of people running down the street, plumes of smoke chasing them, literally. Tell me, if you would, about what was the power, the impact of the planes, especially when they hit the World Trade Center?
Well, the speed of the aircraft are anywhere between 200 knots to 400 knots. The amount of force, it's billions of pounds of pressure per square inch. It's just unfathomable to try to explain it. But it appears, based on the footage that we see, that they were trying to take out a corner of that building. And in fact, that looks like they succeeded in doing that with that much force.
We're taking a look right now, and I think what you're talking about is hits right there, that corner.
That's correct.
What exactly does that do, Michael?
Well, essentially it takes out one of the superstructures that support the overall building, that corner. If you can get one corner taken out, the other 3 won't be able to withstand the weight of the building, and it will tip in that direction.
They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly the time of day they were doing this in New York, a crowded New York, 9 in the morning.
Certainly. Historically, the previous attacks that American interests have seen throughout the world, especially in the Middle East, have generally come about 1 o'clock p.m. in the afternoon. That's generally the busy times throughout the Middle Eastern society. However, they are quite keen to our busy times and the most crowded times to hit. 9 o'clock in the morning is in fact one of them.
And they hit in the financial district. They knew that it would cripple us financially? This is one of the biggest spots they could have hit.
Well, more so than an economic issue, it is the heart of America. Everybody looks at New York City as being the Big Apple and the heart of America, and the World Trade Center, which they tried to take down once before and didn't succeed because it wasn't planned out properly. However, their engineers did do a better job at planning this, and they did in fact succeed, unfortunately.
You've seen terror firsthand, narrowly escaping an attack in Beirut. Tell us about that.
Yes, the trauma that goes along with an attack such as this is just something that's indescribable, and that's what those people are feeling today. Just think about the people inside the actual World Trade Center when you have a 757 crashing into it at that elevation. It's beyond belief.
This has really brought America to its knees. A lot of people have flights scheduled for tomorrow. A lot of people around here are probably thinking very seriously about canceling their flights. I know that all flights are grounded at this point, but when we are back up and running, any suggestion, what kind of advice can you give to the traveler? What can they be looking out for to secure themselves?
Well, anything that seems out of the norm. Getting onto an airplane, if you see somebody that looks out of the norm or acting in strange behavior, get somebody who's in official capacity and let them know, one of the flight attendants or a pilot or security at the airports. And I'm sure we're going to see more of a physical presence of security at airports coming up. I'll be surprised, though, if we see within the next 24 hours the FAA lift the restriction of flights.
National leaders, and I know you yourself have told me that this is the signature of, if not Osama bin Laden himself, then definitely a Middle Eastern faction. Should we kind of gird ourselves for even more attacks like this?
Absolutely. One of the key elements in terrorist attacks like this are to try to undermine the public's confidence in our government. Clearly, we can't let that happen. And one of the ways to get that confidence back of our people, let's do our job and find out exactly who's behind this really quick and punish them for it.
All right, let's hope we don't see anything like this again.
Let's hope so.
All right, Michael Taylor, thanks for joining us and adding your insight to this. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you, Tori. And now we're going to continue our coverage from the moment this began early this morning. Fox 25 had crews heading towards Washington and New York City. I'm prepared to speak with one of them right now.
And as you can imagine, it's quite difficult to approach these cities, but we do have Fox 25's Monica Morales and her photographer joining us on the phone from Morristown, New Jersey, which under normal circumstances would be about 45 minutes, an hour's drive west of New York City. Monica, tell us about your journey there and what you're learning there.
Actually, it was a very emotional journey, as you can tell. Morristown Memorial Hospital is about 45 minutes from New York City. Now, at this point, the hospitals in the area are helping us out a little bit. They're helping a lot of the different vehicles. Shoot. I'm sorry.
Monica, we can still hear you. Can you hear us? All right. Well, obviously, there's a lot going on there, and we're unable to complete that report, but we hope to have that for you coming up a little bit later on.
Many of the television stations in New York City have been shut down because the tower that they relied on to get their signal out was on top of the north, I believe, tower of the World Trade Center, and so they've not been broadcasting. They've shut down the city. The tunnels are closed, bridges are closed, the subway has been closed, so it's very difficult to gain access to that area, and people are very sensitive about where we are.
And folks who've watched this whole drama play out on television today can only imagine what it would be like to not be able to get your local TV news coverage when the eyes of the world are literally on your city, and all this is taking place, and you can only rely on sporadic reports. And we understand that even on the internet, there's been so much traffic that a lot of the sites are overloaded. So TV and radio is really the way people are getting their news about this today.
One of the things that we've been concerned about here is how things are being handled in Boston. Obviously, we're concerned about the two flights that originated from Logan. We're concerned about security at Logan Airport. But up